say anything anymore. And I'm wondering, who's this guy? So I asked him his name. He said his name was Lloyd Matson. I asked my older brothers if they knew who this guy was, because I had no idea. My older brother Jimmy didn't remember him at all. My brother Clarence did, though. Clarence said, Lloyd Matson was the first white man who didn't look down on me. I was back at the conference the next day, and Lloyd was down. He was at a table just down from me away. So I went over to visit him during a quiet time and said, well, you know about me. Who are you? Clarence had told me that Lloyd had gone out looking for James Brady, and he stayed out in the bush longer than anybody else, that he wouldn't quit looking. So I started asking about Brady. And Lloyd told me to talk to Alan Quant. So I know Larange. I came back and I started asking questions. I talked to Alan Quant. What do you know? What do you know about James Brady? And Alan was very interested. We did several interviews. And he had lots to say. I got to Larange as a kid in 1967. We moved from Malinosa to Larange. But I don't remember the search. I was just too young. I learned all about it through research. Interviewing people, going up to Stanley Mission, asking people, asking around, getting the backstory, the story that the people told. And that's a lot different kind of research than we're used to. But the authors of this book did even more research. It's the kind of research you don't find academics doing. Real, in the bush, on the water research. And they've produced this incredible book, much better than anything that I could have written, much better. And so I'm honored to be here tonight to be able to introduce something that I'm excited about, something the North should be excited about, and I'm sure the North is. And those are my comments. Thank you very much. I think a moderator is supposed to come on now.
Yes. Hi, everyone. This is Ariel. I'm just going to start sharing my screen now. Thank you so much, Harold. You can turn off your video or keep it on if you'd like. Oops. Sorry, guys. Wrong video. 1 second.
Good evening. My name is Eric Bell, and I was the search coordinator at Lower Foster Lake for Jim Brady and Absalom Halkett. I knew Jim Brady as a child, as he was close friends with my uncle Frank Tompkins and Aunt Irene. Both Jim and Abby were also friends of my mother Bella, my uncle George Patterson, my uncle Joe Bell, and my grandmother and grandfather, Victoria and Dave Patterson. And it was because of these relationships and the stories that I'd heard over the years that I felt that I wanted to become involved in solving the disappearance of Jim and Abby. I became involved with the search when Michael and Deanna first came to Larange to begin their investigation and to interview people who had information on what may have happened at Lower Foster Lake in 1967. It was during these interviews that stories of murder began to unfold and we realized that a search expedition to Lower Foster Lake was warranted. We conducted 3 expeditions to Lower Foster Lake, and each time we uncovered evidence that supported the stories that were told by the Indigenous people over the past 50 years. If we hadn't received help from the Grandmothers Bay Underwater Search and Recovery Team led by Thompson Mackenzie, and the financial contributions by Simon Fraser University, the Lac La Ronge Indian Band, and the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan, we may not have accomplished as much as we did. And I would like to thank these organizations for their contributions and moral support. Cold Case North describes in detail the searches that we conducted, the emotional roller coaster rides that we experienced, and more importantly, the evidence that we found that supported the stories that were told to us about what happened in June 1967. I hope that you enjoy reading Cold Case North as much as we enjoyed conducting the search for Jim Brady and Absalom Halkett.
Go.
Chapter 34, Focusing. When I look at those wall maps of Canada, the ones with a table of road distances between major cities and a scale in the corner, my eye isn't drawn to the Rockies, the big blue of Hudson Bay, or the Gulf of St. Lawrence, nor does it float up to the Arctic. It goes to Saskatchewan. I see the dark forest and deep snow of the north, but like those machines for hypersensitive focusing in the sci-fi film Blade Runner, my mind whirs and clicks, and La Ronge comes into view. A few more clicks of the lens, and I see a cabin nestled in the trees. Yet more clicks, and there is a warm hearth, laughter, and book-lined shelves. A little more focus, and there on a table sits a Bible and the Communist Manifesto. I hear the repartee between Jim and Abby, spending the night together before leaving on a prospecting trip early the next morning. They argue about politics and the best way to emancipate Indigenous people. Abby talks about spiritualism. Jim tries to persuade him there is a future in revolution. Both reach for their books to find a reference. Momentarily, the whole scene jars. I'm still a newcomer, but I already know that camaraderie and philosophizing by educated, hard-working Indigenous men in a book-filled cabin in the north is at odds with the image that Canada portrays to the world. Not a hockey stick, sunburnt homesteading family, handsome Mountie, or chic Montrealese in sight, let alone a moose or noble savage uncontacted by civilization. I try to refocus, but Jim and Abby are gone, released into the ether. Spirits in the clear night air, so cold that when you breathe in, it hurts. Chapter 12, Persons of Interest. The world of investigations uses the term person of interest to describe someone about whom there are suspicions but not yet hard evidence of involvement in a crime, or someone who may have important information about a crime. Frank Tompkins, Deanna's Uncle Frank, in keeping with his take-no-prisoners approach, has a long list. The pilot who dropped Jim and Abby off at the wrong lake, the Americans, hitmen masquerading as fishing tourists flown up to kill the prospectors, the fishing guide working at the lake who led the Americans to Jim and Abby, their business partner, their boss, and their friend. In almost everything that I read or hear about the disappearance, these individuals crop up again and again. 4 of them are dead, 1 is in his 80s, and the others, the Americans, are forever nameless. An inauspicious start. Nevertheless, concentrating on them helps to clarify what roles they might have had and helps to have their name crossed off the list, if appropriate. Understanding who they are and their relationships to Jim and Abby is a good place to start unraveling the mystery. I seek the advice of the police, this time on the role of motive when investigating missing persons cases and when these cases become criminal investigations. The police advise that there is a wide range of things that could lead them to believe that someone's disappearance is suspicious and a potential homicide, such as evidence of a struggle or a witness who saw the missing person with someone who had reason to do him or her harm. The potential motive of a person of interest is part of the equation, but it has to be assessed case by case. The past history of the missing person, such as social networks, associates, patterns of behaviour, prior contact with the police, also comes into play in some instances, but that does not mean the police do not take a disappearance seriously. An attempt should still be made to locate the person. A missing person's history is important because it might suggest a motive for somebody to harm that person. But the police tell me that there is often no single thing that makes them believe that a missing person might have met with foul play. The totality of the circumstances and any evidence recovered must be used to make that determination. There is an important reoccurring theme in all that the police say, the past history of the person, as they delicately put it. Jim's history is extensive, legendary, in fact. Jim was famous for organising opposition to government policies, educating people about colonialism and oppression, being a communist, and building communities. As for Abby, though he was not a communist, he did what Jim did, just at a more local level.
Cold Case North, Chapter 35, Pastahowan, As Far as You Can Go. Long ago, I promised my Uncle Frank that I would try to find out what happened to Jim Brady and Abby Halkett, and I did my best as his niece to do right by him and those missing men. In August 2018, I spent a lot of time sitting at the back of the boat on Lower Foster Lake, watching and listening. On day one, I watched as Thompson, McKenzie, and Stanley Roberts demonstrated to us how to use the sonar and how to set up a grid for the search. I saw my cousin Eric Bell use landmarkers to study the boat as he drove backwards, doing what he could to limit the effects of the waves and wind that wanted to push us off course. I sat by Stanley and watched the images of the smooth lake bottom that scrolled by on his laptop. I witnessed Michael take photos and collect information from every conversation, consulting the map of the lake and grafting the stories onto locations. On day two, we sought and located the sandy beach that McIver Ainanu had referenced, as well as the cliffs where he had found the scuff mark that he thought was from the prow of a boat. We drove to the end of the lake where Jim and Abby had been dropped off and where they had set up camp. At that point, Eric cut the engine and pulled out a smoke, giving us some time to go through the various scenarios. On the third day of the search in 2019, needing a chance to stretch our legs, I asked Eric if we could return to the shore where we had found a medicine wheel the year before. Thompson had found the scattered stones, now overgrown with wild blueberries, and I wondered whether we could learn more about them. As we walked at one end, Rob noticed that the stones had likely been subject to a forest fire, confirming that the formation was at least 5 years old, and we talked about the ways that we could determine how much older it might be. I recognized the pattern to be not so much a circle as a spiral, built on a clearing with a gradual upward slope away from the lake. I traced the outer loop with my eye as I walked carefully, trying to see past the foliage to trace the path that would lead to the center. As I began to see the whole outline, I couldn't believe my eyes. Sitting at the center point, where the terrain was a mound, almost like an altar, sat an eagle feather, 19 inches long. I picked it up, unbelieving, and showed it to Eric. What else could it mean but encouragement? He nodded, and we were reassured.
I guess I'm back on. Some questions as I'm watching and listening to you people. Eric.
He's there, Harold. Eric's there.
Can you hear me now?
Go ahead.
I don't think that Eric heard your question. You might want to ask it again, Harold.
Yeah, my internet connection's a little weak here. Eric, you were around in 1967, L'Orange. What do you remember from back then? And if you want to add on to that, how did that memory of what was going on in 67 influence your activities in 2018, 2019?
Well, what I remember back in 1967, I had just returned from St. Thomas College in North Battleford. I was going to high school there. And I arrived back in L'Orange towards the end of June. And when I got back, I went to my grandmother and grandfather's place, and they had told me that they were out searching for Jim at that time. And I know that my grandmother was quite disturbed, and my grandfather for that matter, because him and Jim were really good friends, and they were comrades, to say the least. My grandfather was a big CCF follower, and and they were concerned that something was going on there. But I remembered when they quit the search, how disturbed my grandparents were. And then there were stories that were coming out even back then that when they couldn't find them, the UFO stories started to come about, and they got taken by Sasquatch, and all kinds of stories were coming out then. And I know my grandmother was really disturbed. She said there was no way that they went missing, because she knew Jim and Abby, and they knew that they were really good bushmen, and if they got lost on the lake or close to the lake, they would have just climbed the hill and they could see the lake and then walk back. So they were concerned that something else had happened back then. Because of my family's close ties to both Jim and Abby, and I'd heard so many stories over the years about what had happened. And the interesting part about these stories is they were told a little differently by different people. And it was how they remembered things and how they interpreted what was happening back then. But the principles of the stories were pretty much always the same, especially from our my fellow band members, and that they knew that something else had happened, but they were not so much angry as they were frustrated that nothing was being done. And so in 1918, when I was asked to help out, I actually felt honored to be asked to help out and help with the search. But primarily because of my family's relationship with Jim and Abby, and I wanted to know what had happened back then too.
Okay, thank you. I have the same experience. That's what I heard in the North when I started looking into the story too, is that people were disappointed. They knew something had happened, but the truth had never come out. So thank you for your work in bringing that truth out. Michael, you from Australia, investigate mining. What is it like coming to Canada? This is a totally new geography. And a different story, not necessarily a mining story. What was that like for you to come here and see where and how we live?
Yeah, thanks, Harold. You're right. So I came here 4 years ago. While I met Deanna about 7 years ago, I'd literally been in the country 3 days when she called and told me about this story, which fascinated me immediately. I think as an outsider, people, it's clear that I'm an outsider because of my accent and because of the kind of questions that I would ask. That I was, I sort of joke and say I was authentically naive. I couldn't pretend that I was anything else. And at first, I think that created not so much tension, but people were just kind of taken aback that who was this guy and where was he from and how did he get connected to this story? And once I explained that through, my connection to Deanna and then through her to Eric, I think that really put people's minds at rest. And I've done quite a lot of work where I have been an outsider. And sometimes it's true that that can delay the period at which people open up to you. Often the fact that you're an outsider and you ask naive questions means people are very frank with you and they explain things to you like they would explain it to a child, because it's just so clear that you don't understand the historical background. And that was the case for this story. I had to work really hard and do a lot of reading to try to understand what a lot of other people already knew. But I think the other really significant research challenge really was about mining. So I've done a lot of work around injustice in the mining sector, and that is really universal. So in that sense, the mining industry in Canada is not a lot different to the mining industry in Australia, but I've done a lot of work about the mining industry in Africa. And, questions about transparency, accountability, trying to find out basic information about company ownership, a lot of those things are obscured by laws that are in place. So the government prevents people from finding out, for example, what's called the beneficial owner of a company. So that's who really owns the company. That's true in Canada today. It's true in Australia today. It's true in many countries in Africa today. And there are interests, vested interests about why the law remains like that. So for us, that became a problem in terms of documentary evidence and what we were able to find. There are a lot of hidden things that we think remain secret and that we were not able to fully uncover. But we're happy with what we were able to stitch together from a mix of interviews with people and also documentary evidence. And I guess just one more thing on what was it like being in Canada. I live in Montreal, which is Francophone Canada. It's completely different to Australia. And then I go to northern Saskatchewan, which is even more different. Most of the people I meet in Saskatchewan are Indigenous. And it's, again, completely different. But it is funny, like, I'm not from a very flat part of Australia. I'm from a fairly hilly part. But I've got to admit, I really feel at home when I go to Saskatchewan. There's, quite a similarity, and I feel relaxed there. It was a really wonderful place to do research and to meet people. Thank you.
And we're glad you came. A lot of people have looked up this story and thought about this story, myself included. I was going to write a book on it. But you came and you did it. You got the job done. So I thank you for that.
Thanks.
Deanna, your background is literature. You work in academia. What is it like to write this book? This isn't research like you do. You didn't go to the library for this one.
Well, Michael did.
You're not.
Sorry, I didn't mean to step on your words. Like you've got a bit more to ask. It would be great to say that I just set my mind to it, and then things came together. That you can't write a research project for this. It's Uncle Frank has been asking me to research this for 20 years, really, and I wanted to, but it was so hard, and I couldn't even imagine how I would. And I think that, I mean, I don't think it's a research method of serendipity that diminishes what it is. There's some kind of, you do have to wait and do things in the right way. You do have to, you know, but also if you have a friend who's written on, you know, the mining industry and who's written, he helped an Indigenous person in Australia write his autobiography. And then he moves to Canada and doesn't have a job, you know, to grab him.
Yes.
And then, so that was, so skill number one, I'm a great, have great recognition for talent, but also because of Phil's experience, I knew he also knew that it wasn't a matter of just barging in. I knew that at any point, if the family members had said to us, stop, we would stop, you know, and we meant that very wholeheartely. We didn't want to cause pain, but we wanted to remember the legacies, not just of Jim Brady, who is an amazing, you know, 20th century hero, like, you know, as an Métis intellectual and activist, but Abby Halkett. There were very little stories. I'm just so thrilled the photographs we've been able to find, that his granddaughter has actually originally contacted Uncle Frank, but then contacted us, is so happy to have, you know, because they lost him before his daughter really remembers him very much anyway. And I think that when we then went to La Ronge to kind of start carefully walking, I mean, I say in the book, Eric, it's a good thing you were just on the cusp of retirement and there couldn't be a more perfect person to contact. And I know, of course, Eric is my cousin, but I know already I've been out in the boat with him with my kids. You know, I know, you know how amazing you are on the land, and I can tell you, anybody who knows me knows I'm not. So Eric kept us safe and but also amazingly connected. So the research was a lot about trying to walk carefully and respectfully. And then, I mean, even you, Harold, like you are one of 6 different people who shared with us their notes on this search. This was a story on a lot of people's hearts for a lot of years. And it was a real honor to be able to work on it and to go as far as we could.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for all the work that you did, and for the research. I know it wasn't warm out on the lake all the time, and things got a little rough sometimes. So I thank you for your hard work. Thank all 3 of you for all your hard work, and thank you for bringing the story out. It's an important story, and a story that people in the North have been waiting to. Well, so I'm not going to take up all the time here. And I believe there's with your.
Hi everyone, this is Ariel again. I think Harold's Wi-Fi has gotten a little too weak, but that's okay. For now, we'll move to some of the audience questions, which I'll direct to the authors directly. Let me just quickly. Okay, here we go. So we have a question from Molly for all of you. I'd like to know why the authors chose true crime as the genre to tell this story. Any of you can feel free to take this, but maybe Deanna to start.
I just want to quickly start, and then Michael, by all means, jump in. That's the thing, is it seems like a murder mystery, like a true crime, and so there's. It's interesting how much the expectations of that is kind of directs what people read, and so I really ask you to think of it actually outside of that. I mean, there was obviously, you know, a mystery, you know, a missing persons case and a mystery, and you know, and stories of crime. But I think it's important to to kind of try to read outside of that and read all the other stories around it. But Michael, why don't you jump in?
Yeah, that's a great question, Molly. And I think when you first hear the story, it really grips you like this true crime thriller when you actually don't know much about it. But actually, as you get to know more and more about it, you realize it's a story of history. It's a story of a community. It's a story of lots of different relationships. It's a story of generations. It's a family story. And as we started to talk to people, we realized that this story has been circulating for a very long time. You're right that part of the way, I guess it's being, the book is being marketed is as true crime, but also equally as other things. Obviously, Jim Brady and Abbey, while he was less well known, they're really these tremendous historic figures. What they were able to do for their community. So it could just as much be a story about community activism, for example. But we wanted to have fun with this true crime genre as well. And I think, the true crime genre is you try to get this gotcha moment. And often there is a focus on, an alleged perpetrator, and, you want to make that easy for an audience. But actually, the reality is complicated, right? It's not like that. And we really wanted to subvert and counter that genre as well by opening up and saying, this book isn't the complete package. We really do hope this opens up a lot of other work about both men, because there is a lot more to learn, and there are things that we didn't find out.
Amazing. Thank you both. We have a question from Lohit. This question is, what role did community play in this investigation? Did they give any information to the authors which was new or not known before? And this is particularly the community, so not the police reports and things like that.
Eric, I think that's one for you.
Okay. The community played a large part, especially Grandmother's Bay, Stanley Mission, and community members in La Ronge. These stories had been circulating for 50 years. And when they heard that we went up to Foster Lake, a lot of the community were very supportive of what we were doing. And we could be in the grocery store or down the street or whatnot. People would stop by and say, I heard you got back from Lower Foster Lake. What did you find? And showed immense interest. And there was always a story or two that they remembered from back when it happened, and for what their moms and dads told them, and everybody was just really supportive, of what we were doing, and they were interested in what we were doing, and in that way, the communities kept us going forward by giving us the encouragement of proceeding what we were doing, and to me it was it made it worthwhile doing, because there were so many people that were that wanted to know, that it gave the encouragement, and oh, you got to let us know when the book is out, and just everything, and those are the type of things that that kept me going on a daily basis, when you're going over all your information and things that you should have done differently, but just a general feeling from the community was very supportive.
Go ahead.
I want to add to that, actually. I just want to say that that's absolutely true, but also it's really important to emphasize that Eric, has run the emergency medical services, the ambulance system, for like over 20 years, long time. And so there'd be this thing about a sense of somebody knew something, and then Eric would say, oh, I think their brother's father's nephew, his wife used to work for me. And we would find these ways of the networks of families that you knew, both historically because you grew up there, but also from the networks you have now, was incredible. I'm trying to think of an example. Michael, can you jump in with one? Because and Michael's research was no slouch either. Thinking about the people you contacted just by cold calling, like the pilot, for example.
Yeah. Well, I guess one example is I would say to Eric, so this happened, Eric, we really need to, I really need to know more about this person. And he said, oh, I went to school with his daughter and she's coming to L'Orange this weekend, which was true. So I ended up meeting her, and not even knowing that Eric had any connection. That's really the advantage of a small community, that people are very connected. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for your answers. We have a question now from Lynn for Dr. Reeder. She would really like to hear more about the collaborative process of undertaking this search and then writing the book, and why you feel it was successful.
I guess I think that each of us is happy with how it's gone, and I think that's what's made it successful. I think that it brought some peace to Uncle Frank, and that has made it successful. That it's renewed the memory for Abby, as well as for Jim. All of those things are signs of success, I think.
Awesome. Michael or Eric, do either of you have additions to that in terms of the collaborative process with the three of you working together?
Yeah, thanks. Actually, I was asked about this the other day, and I would love to say there's a formula. But actually, I think there was some luck in that the three of us worked very well together. So there are some basic things like, we really respected each other's different areas of skill and knowledge. We were all very open to, argument about what was really going on. So that helps if you have that kind of relaxed, initial approach, but also respective of the others. But I think like basic things, I think Eric, Gianna, and I, we all laugh at the absurdities of life. And that makes it, if you're stuck on a boat all day for 4 days, and of course there were others, who on the boat who felt the same way, had a similar sense of humor. That kind of thing really helps a lot. So that's really difficult to replicate and say, well, in other academic projects, for example, this is what you need to look out for. So I think there was an element of luck, but also, the fact that our personalities worked well together, was terrific, and obviously behind the success of the project.
I think also not just the three of us, but the teams that we went up to Lower Foster Lake with. The first time around with Stanley and Thompson, the way that we interacted on the boat, worked together, respect for what each other was doing, but also the team from Stanley Mission that came with us on our second expedition, and how we all worked together, and the stories that they told us when we were there, and also gave us some insight into the families behind the stories as well. And I think it was that mutual respect that we had for for everybody that that we had worked with, and by making everybody feel part of the team and valued their expertise and shared all the information, I think that was really important for how we conducted the searches at Lower Foster Lake. So it was that mutual respect that everybody had for everybody else, and we were all there to do one job, and we respected everybody's position and what they had to say. And I think that was very important on a lot of the evidence that we found.
Thank you all so much. I know that it really sings through for me in the book in terms of the collaborative and respectful process that you all shared. So it's really lovely to hear more of that from you all tonight. We have a question from Nicole, who maybe is asking what all of us are a little curious about, which is, did you have your own version of events before you started the investigation, and did that change while you were doing the search?
Let me answer that first, because as the outsider, I can honestly say absolutely not. And maybe that is another advantage. Of course, when you start to read things, that really will lead you in a certain track. But, absolutely not. I had no idea in advance. I didn't know any of the rumors at all. They different versions of events came out quickly, but I didn't go in with any baggage.
And I just want to add if you look at the coroner's inquest, a lot was made of this idea that maybe they were eaten by bears, and it's just this, frustration sometimes with struggling with these competing stories. And I say in the book, it's one thing to get, one person get eaten by a bear, but two people eaten by a bear, but, their boots, the tools they had, like their Geiger counters, their axes, their everything, all eaten by bears, some of the theories, we were happy to look at and find better theories for. Anyway, I don't know if Eric, you have anything to add?
Well, for me, I had quite a bit of baggage because I had heard a lot of the stories, but I think it was about 2 or 3 months before Deanna and Michael came to Larange. I was playing poker with some friends of mine on the reserve, and a couple of them started talking about Jim Brady and Abby. And the things that they told me kind of changed my mind about what happened there. And, these people that told me these stories, they were there. And so I thought, there's got to be something to it. The stories about the search and everything else didn't make a lot of sense to me. I grew up in the bush. I worked in the bush. I helped trap. Some of the things that came out of the inquest just didn't make sense. And so I knew that the stories that the people were telling, there had to be some truth to it. But to put it all together is a different story in itself.
No, thank you so much for sharing. This kind of leads into another question, but actually a comment that I want to start with, which relates to some of the questions that I'm going to group together. Valerie Barnes-Connell in the chat is just first congratulating you on having just an amazing story. She's really looking forward to reading the book, and she just got her copy. She said, in 9.5 years as a Larange Northerner, I can't tell you how often someone would call out of the blue to ask if there were any updates on the case of Jim Brady and Abby Halkett. This is really cool. Thank you, Michael, Deanna, and Eric. Some of the questions that follow in the chat include, do you think that or hope that this book may cause the case to be reopened? Do you think that the sonar search will be done again? And do you think it'll bring more information from the community or public who maybe have hesitated to come forward to date? A lot packed all in once, but you can answer generally.
I mean, I guess I think it's fair to say that our basic hope is that the book has reopened interest in the case, and we hope an urgency to get to the bottom of what really happened, which would include some of the things that we've documented in the book. And we hope that the police will use their funds and their personnel and their time and revisit this. And so both men are still listed as missing persons in Saskatchewan if you go to the missing persons website in Saskatchewan. And we hope that the police would reopen the case, using their resources.
And that's exactly it. It's a missing persons case. That means that there were people that were never interviewed officially. That means that that was never investigated, that there was any foul play. The official version or suspicion, they didn't confirm, but suspicion was that that they were lost. It's pretty unsatisfying.
In the last few weeks, I've had some community members suggest that maybe we should go back. I know that there are some people out there that still have information, vital information on what has happened. For me, I don't think I would go back unless I had the family's wishes. I think it's up to the family to decide if they, want a recovery search. I think that's the most important thing.
Thank you. I'm going to quickly tack on because we actually have a member of the family in the chat with us, Allison. Allison is, it's scrolling by, of Jim's granddaughter, and she was wondering if you had found anything, which I know you've just answered, but she says, I sure hope you go back.
Thank you, Allison. It's really nice to meet you. I'm glad to see you there. Yeah. I'm sorry. This is a hard thing, isn't it? I'm sorry. We can't hear you, Allison.
Oh, she won't be able to unmute herself or themselves, okay. But I just wanted to share the message as it appears in the chat.
Okay. We can see you, Allison.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. But I know from talking to other family members, it's really painful. I mean, that's the thing about it is, it sounds like a mystery and let's go solve it, and it's buried into a lot of people's lives. Yeah, a lot of families, a lot of pain. I don't know if you're related to Amy Brady, but she's a niece of Jim Brady. She's a student of mine at Simon Fraser University about 10 years ago. And she ended up doing her paper on this because, of course, it was a story that carried in her family too. So I think that there's a lot of cousins on both the Brady and the Halkett side that, and nieces and nephews. But even my cousin Vanessa, who's just of the generation, was, that sense of, that our lives don't matter, and that that's painful too. Right.
Allison adds that she's Ruth Ahinaku's eldest daughter, who is Jim's daughter.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us, Allison. We deeply appreciate your presence. We have time for a couple of more questions tonight. One of the ones I definitely would love to get to is from Shirley Hardman. She writes, Indigenous ways of knowing and understanding our world are often metaphysical. Everything happens for a reason. Everything teaches us. I know this because barely a year goes by that the river does not claim an Indian life, in quotes. Our spiritual teachings are our sacred laws. What role, if any, did you find for dreams, feelings, and the emotions?
I'm dying to tell the Cookham story, but it's going to take time. Is it all right if I jump in and tell the Cookham story?
But just before you do, let me jump in. we honestly did not set out to do this, but dreams are this incredible theme in the book. And Eric, Jana, and I, we repeatedly had dreams. So some of those are referred to in the book. And I can tell you, at the start of this project, I never thought that that would be the case. But anyway, Deanna, take it away.
I'll do the really.
Before you start, Deanna,
Yes.
just to let you know, before every search in the mornings, we said prayers to the Great Spirit. We offered tobacco. We were, in fact, very spiritual throughout the whole process, and especially when we found the medicine wheel and how we went back to it. It's quite surprising, and for me, just going across the lake, knowing that we were doing something, the quietness in evenings when you're sitting there thinking and you think back of what happened, our spirituality really came to the forefront.
No, that was, I'll tell you a very, very shortened version of a family story that I grew up knowing about. And it's about our grandmother, Erica, my grandmother, Cookham. And there was a story about, she was a medicine woman, and she had, it'd been a story that my mom told me a million stories, but this is one that she told a lot, and she told it over and over about how Cookham had cured a man from blindness. And she told me about how she had to go for she ended up to find out how to cure him. She didn't have the answer. So she went to sleep, and she had a dream. And she had a dream that a bear had a bunch of willow around its neck. And so she went and gathered those plants and turned it into a poultice for his eyes. And the man that she cured, his name was Absalom Halkett. And I never put that story together with, Jim and Abby being, like Abby Halkett being the same man. And so it was a kind of in some ways being able to take that story from that, it's just always there. And I've told it a million times, and have it connect to this search, I feel is meant to be. There you go. And I think that I feel closer to my grandmother and our, maybe Indigenous ways of knowing, because I see the continuation of, Abby's stories lives on, our ways of healing and of searching live on, and that's very comforting to me. Thank you, Shirley. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. I'm going to share for the last comment of the evening, not a question, but just a congratulatory note from, I hope I'm saying this right, Louis Gibbons. I've had the good fortune of reading this book over the past 2 days. It was beautifully written, and the sense of community and such a strong desire to find the truth against very strong odds really jumped off the pages. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to quickly invite all of our panelists, including Harold, to say a quick goodbye, and then you will not hear from me again this evening, but I just want to say thank you to all of our lovely audience who have been so engaged and excited and enthusiastic in all the weeks leading up to tonight. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for allowing me to be part of this. And thank the audience. 100 people tuned in tonight. That's incredible for a book launch. But most importantly, thank you to the authors. Thank you for all of the work that you did. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for the energy you put into it. Hi, all my relations.
Thank you. And so just to say mine quickly, I really want to start by saying that when I told people about this project, people would say, oh, it must be so heart-wrenching. and even depressing to work on it. But actually, the truth is, it wasn't like that at all. We were always very clear that at the center of the story was a tragedy of these two missing men. But as I got closer to Jim and Abby, because I really came to feel that I knew them, it was this totally energizing and positive experience, really to learn about what they'd accomplished and what they meant to the people in the community around them. And, you know, equally encouraging were all the fun and smart and funny and kind and generous people we met along the way as part of our research, and we just couldn't have done it without them. So it was not this depressing, it was really this inspiring and heartwarming project. And I think to learn about how it's possible to honor and remember people and to counter injustice. You know, Jim and Abby, they are deeply missed in the community, and people are very protective of their legacy. So we came to understand that very quickly. And our version of the story is not exactly the same as your version of the story. It'll be a little different. But thank you for trusting us and allowing us to do this. And most of all, I need to thank Eric and Deanna. I simply could not have played my part, you know, without you. And of course, also to University of Regina Press and Harold. You know, we really appreciate it so much. Thank you.
And likewise, I mean, thank you, Harold, for being part of this, and of course, Eric, for really keeping us alive. My husband, Eric, was always grateful that he knew I'd come home because you were there. But Michael is such an amazing writer, and Eric and I were laughing once because we were going through one of the drafts, and we know what happens at the end, but he writes in such a way that you're turning the pages, going, "What's going to happen next?" So we felt that, and so we hope you do too. Thank you so much, Michael. You're awesome.
Well, I'd like to thank both of you for letting me join. You know, I've done a lot of things in my life, but this was probably my greatest adventure.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.
Bye.
That was awesome. I'm going to try and go to my as well. That was awesome.
Aren't they